News Talk is online. News Talk Online is a production of paltalk.com, the largest multimedia interactive program on the internet with more than 4 million unique users on demand on iTunes and on YouTube and on Blip TV and on my blog, GaryBaumgarten.com, where you're encouraged to post your comments, whether you agree with yours truly or not. No retribution. And thanks to our good friends at CRN Digital Talk Radio, we're syndicated to an additional 12 million households. I am your host, Gary Baumgarten. I welcome you to the show. And I remind you to go to reportergary.com, reportergary.com, check it early and check it often for stories that you may or may not see, hear, or read in the mainstream media. I'd like to bring your attention to the fact that history is being rewritten in terms of literature. It seems that certain school districts don't like the way Mark Twain originally wrote the story about Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer, and there's certain words that appear in this great body of literature, especially the use of the N-word, that have been redacted. And Mark Twain's words, even though his name appears on the works, ladies and gentlemen, have been changed. The N-word has been changed to the word slave, because we now need to be politically correct even when looking at historically classical literature. Well, joining us to talk about this issue is a man who thoroughly understands this kind of rewriting of literature, because he is a longtime teacher of literature and culture, and I am proud to say a daily contributor to reportergary.com. So with that introduction, Jonathan Wolfman, welcome to News Talk Online on the Pal Talk News Network. Yeah. So today you write about the redacting of Mark Twain's works. Apparently, although recognized as one of the great writers of all time, apparently he still needs some editing. He just didn't get it on the mark because he had the audacity in the dialogue to use the N-word, and I guess we can't accept that in the literature that we are teaching our children today in the schools.
Well, here's the situation. A publishing house out of Atlanta has been asked, and they have done, to create a new redaction, as you say, of Huck Finn that eliminates the 219 utterances of the word, and they substitute the word slave. I mean, it's wrong on so many levels. Linguistically, they're not equivalent. My primary objection, however, is as a teacher, because it seems to me, Gary, that once you take the position that a student should not see the word, what you are really assuming, and I think this is a subtle point, but I want people to get this, what you're really assuming is the absolute failure of teaching. What you're assuming is that teachers are inadequate to the task of helping children learn how to interrogate texts. And what I mean by that is that we need, as teachers of literature, to give children at any age, obviously in an age-appropriate manner, historical, literary, linguistic, sociological, economic, even psychological tools to dig very, very hard beneath the surface of any text so as to surround and grasp how it may have been read and felt and understood in its own original broad set of contexts, as well as in our context, in the context that other people may read these works. In other words, it's a failure of teaching to assume that in order to give a child a legitimate experience of Huckleberry Finn that you have to pretend that the word was not in coin in the 1840s, when we know that it was. Now, when you consider how long Huckleberry Finn is, and there are only 219 instances of the word in the entire book, you know then, I think it's safe to assume then, that there's no gratuitousness here on Twain's part. He isn't using the word in a way so as to inflict pain. He's using the word because, as he says in his opening to the book, he is particularly interested in capturing authentic dialogue and authentic culture of Missouri, of Illinois, of the Mississippi. I think that's what my concern is. I also would say to you, Gary, that the reports are that about 750,000 copies of this new version have been run. But at this point, no schools or school districts have purchased it. But at the same time, while that's encouraging, we are fairly early in the 2011-2012 book ordering season. So I think it's important to keep this kind of issue in front of people.
Well, and I agree with you, and it's a macro issue, frankly. How can you teach the great classics by changing the words of the great classics? And as you spoke about it from the perspective of a teacher, I had the dreaded flashbacks to my days as a student when I was taught the writings of Mark Twain, and of course we all read Huckleberry Finn, and of course it was put into context, and one of the things I walked away from was a greater sensitivity toward African American, or as we said back then, black people, more so in the United States, because clearly the book isn't a racist book that's designed to make blacks look bad, and as you say, the N-word is not used gratuitously in the book. If anything, there is a maturation process among these young hooligans, little juvenile delinquents, with regard to black people, and they create, there's an affinity that is created that you feel as you read the work.
I never once, not one time, experienced any colleague, student, parent raise the question of appropriateness. So it almost seems to me that the issue that is being raised here is almost a manufactured issue. And I can't speculate on the motives of the people manufacturing it, but it just does not seem authentic to me, Gary.
Well, I could speculate. It could be that there are certain individuals who want to use the term that I used in the headline, whitewash the fact that there was racism, that this country has a very sordid history of racism. Because if you take the text, if you take the dialogue as authentic in that period of time, because of course as it became less politically correct to speak in those terms, it didn't mean the racism went away. It just went behind closed doors. You now ignore the fact that it occurred. Cassandra in the United Kingdom, welcome to News Talk Online on the Pal Talk News Network.
Thank you, Gary, and hello, Jonathan. It's good to hear you.
Thank you.
If we look at the novels of the past, putting into some sort of historical context, what was actually happening in that time, you know, you can't get everything from the historical books. The authors give us a picture of the historical past as it really was. You know, if we look at Charles Dickens, Jane Austen, they fill in all those little gaps and tell us about the times that they lived in, the mores and norms within society.
You're absolutely right, and that's why literature is so valuable.
Yeah, and I mean, to cut out part of that text, what are we doing to children? Are we expecting them to take a diet of watered down mush that fits within our politically correct and acceptable framework that we have nowadays? That is not going to give them the essence, the guts of that book. And what it
what
really
you're saying,
said,
maybe in a slightly different way. I honestly, I mean, you're quite right. Let me put it this way: you're quite right to say the negative that happens when you do this kind of redacting. I would also say it this way: I can't imagine what positive good comes out of it.
I agree. I don't see any positive good either. I don't see any positive good either.
The other thing that I would add is that you then go from the redacting of these novels, Jonathan, to the alteration of history.
Jerry in Florida. Jerry, go ahead there. Jerry, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Gary. Good evening, Gary, and good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening.
The first American novel I read, I was 10 years old, was Huckleberry Finn. And I was in a country where discrimination was a way of life. And I read it with great interest to the point where I started looking into it. The American Publishing Society in the United States at that time, I found out, refused to publish Huckleberry Finn. It was first published in England in 1884. It wasn't until 1885 that the first American publication came out. And the reason that these people said that they didn't want to publish it was that this book reflected the human values of a black person. That a white would be that friendly with a black person, it was anathema to a great number of people. So there is a historical truth. There's a historical pivot point in Samuel Longhorn Clements' book, a.k.a. Mark Twain, which was his nom de plume. And it forced me to look into the situation, and then you realize that what he is reporting, and Samuel Clements only went through the age of 12 to school. He wasn't any graduate of any university. He was reflecting and reporting on the social times and the social climate of that period in the U.S., and that cannot be covered up by blankets or redactions. That is history, and we must, not should, must understand what the climate of social recognition was at that time. Thank you.
Jonathan, thanks for joining us on News Talk Online on the Pal Talk News Network.